we're going to take a roll of the dice. We're going to take a gamble here because that's exactly what the Raiders did in 2021. They took a very big gamble, and it was a mix of good and bad in last season because it was a season of hell and high water. They started 3-0. 2 of those victories came in overtime against the Baltimore Ravens and the Miami Dolphins. But then things started to tailspin following week 5. There's this email scandal by then head coach John Gruden where he said a lot of very bad things to a variety of teams and players, and that led to his resignation. And in the interim, special teams coach Rich Bisaccia at the time took his place. And then you get to the bye week. You're 5-2. You still feel pretty solid of where you are. And then things really go downhill. Receiver Henry Ruggs gets involved in a deadly DUI car crash that kills another driver and her dog. And he is facing some serious jail time, maybe even a life sentence. And corner Damon Arnett, a week later on Instagram Live, oddly shows off some firearms and makes some death threats on a live social media broadcast. So both of them end up getting released. So at that point in the season, when you come off your bye against the New York Giants, they clearly look like they were emotionally impacted. And not just emotionally impacted, but like from a football standpoint, impacted as well, because there was no downfield threat for Derek Carr. There's not really much of a top option for him. That defense had an even harder time on third down, stopping teams from converting first down, stopping teams from making points, and they would lose their next 5 or 6. They got embarrassingly swept by the Kansas City Chiefs, where the Las Vegas Raiders got outscored 23-89. Yeah, in those 2 games, and that included a Sunday night embarrassment at home. But their gamble, all that bad luck, it kind of took a left turn. They got some dough, if you know what I mean, because Chargers clippered up. Other AFC wildcard teams like the Miami Dolphins, they lucked out in a bad way, and the Raiders, they fought through one last run. They won 4 straight. They even got some key victories against the Indianapolis Colts and the LA Chargers to net a playoff berth. And a lot of that had to do with the play of Derek Carr and the breakout of slot receiver Hunter Renfrow, who looked pretty damn good in those 4 games. And yes, they lost a close game to the Cincinnati Bengals, the eventual AFC champions, but the fact that they even got to that point of getting a playoff game and cutting it close to the Bengals is astonishing. Like, a lot of players deserve credit. Rich Bisaccia deserves credit to fight through that adversity and make it to that point. It's just unfortunate that Rich Bisaccia was not put on as a permanent head coach. But hey, you got to respect him for what he did to get him to that point. Now, in the offseason, they hired New England Patriots offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels, as well as an executive by the name of Dave Ziegler, to be the next GM head coaching duo. So, Josh McDaniels is known for working with Tom Brady for much of his life, and he last worked with Mac Jones before getting hired. So, for the Raiders, your top goal is obviously to get back to the playoffs and make a deep run with Derek Carr. Now, your steps towards making that goal started with the offseason after you had hired McDaniels and Ziegler. Looking at some of their key offseason moves, you re-signed Derek Carr, you extended Max Crosby, you also extended Hunter Renfrow. So, your key 3 guys have all been extended for a long-term future. So, we'll see if it pans out, and we'll see if it works out. But looking at some of their additions, this is where the Las Vegas Raiders really stood out in this department. They made a massive trade to go out and get Davante Adams from the Green Bay Packers, get another weapon for him, for Derek Carr, because, well, as evident in 2021, it means Hunter Renfrow is a good, reliable option. Darren Waller is also pretty solid, but you don't have a downfield threat, and that's where Davante Adams comes in, especially during his time with Aaron Rodgers with the Packers. And all they had to give up was their first round and second round pick in this year's draft. So a win for the Raiders. They didn't really have to give up much. So looking at their other additions, you look at Chandler Jones, the linebacker from the Arizona Cardinals, Kenny Young from the Denver Broncos, corner Chris Jones from the Tennessee Titans, and in a player swap, they got corner Rock Ya-Sin from the Indianapolis Colts, and they gave up defensive end Yannick Ngakoue. So for the Raiders, they got some pretty good additions in the offseason to balance out their new team going into 2022. So looking at some of their losses, as a result of their new additions, they lost Marcus Mariota, their backup, and Casey Hayward, their corner, to the Atlanta Falcons. They also lost Zay Jones, but then again, they didn't really want to overpay him to the Jaguars. They also lost Corey Littleton to the Carolina Panthers. He was a solid linebacker for them. They also released Carl Nassib, the defensive end. So overall, I mean, if you're the Raiders, it wasn't so bad. Looking at some of their draft picks, they didn't have that many because of the Davante Adams trade. Looking at guard Dylan Parham from Memphis, so you're hoping he pans out on the offensive line, and defensive tackle Neil Farrell Jr. from LSU. So for the Raiders this coming season, I mean, they're not exactly a perfect team. I mean, they got better on offense, but they still have a few question marks in the secondary, because I mean, you did get a couple corners in Chris Jones and Rock Ya-Sin, but like, how will they actually do? How is that safety spot? How will the pass rush do? That's now led by Chandler Jones and Max Crosby. So the secondary is kind of the big question mark that should be on everybody's mind. And then as for the offense, how is Derek Carr going to do? He's going to pretty much determine how successful this team does. Because, I mean, Derek Carr is known for being a check down artist. But as evidenced late in the season, he can get aggressive. He can get pretty aggressive with his decision making. He can throw the deep ball when needed. So we should see more of that, especially now that he has Josh McDaniels as his play caller. So you got a pretty solid offense with Derek Carr, Davante Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller, and Josh Jacobs. Let's just hope Derek Carr and Josh McDaniels maximizes on this potential. So looking at some of the key games going into this season, like with every other team in the division, it's every game in the AFC West. And the Raiders immediately have won in week 1 in Los Angeles against the Chargers. So right out of the gate, you're testing out your new dynamic offense against the Chargers' new dynamic defense. So you got to figure things out there. And then week 4 against the Denver Broncos at home. And right after that, week 5 against the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. So who knows? Maybe a revenge game of sorts for that embarrassing blowout. Just don't dance on their logo this time around. The week prior to the Denver game, you go to Tennessee to take on the Titans against a potentially weaker Titans offense. So who knows if you could take care of them or not. You have a couple of late season key games, like week 10 against the Indianapolis Colts, against Matt Ryan, against Jonathan Taylor, week 15 against the New England Patriots at home. So you can't really count out Mac Jones and Bill Belichick yet, but who knows where they'll be at that point in the season. And then the final slate of the season, your final home slate of the season, week 17 and 18, you're playing the 49ers. Yes, it's not the Battle of the Bay necessarily, but you're still pretty much hated division rivals. Not division rivals, but hated rivals because of your history. And in week 18 at home against the Chiefs in, well, depending on where things stand, either team could be fighting for a playoff spot or for the division crown. So going into the season, you face a lot of questions about the offense, about the defense. Like, this is not exactly a better team than the Broncos or the Chargers, but then you could say that about the other teams, vice versa. But the biggest question for me going into this season for the Raiders is about Josh McDaniels. How is he going to be? We know what kind of plays he calls, but how is he going to be as like a person from a morality standpoint? Because during his time in Denver, he wasn't exactly the greatest. He's pretty immature, to be precise. He pretty much like let go of Jay Cutler. He didn't despise Jay Cutler, and ran him out of town. And he was not a people person in Denver, and that got him fired. So how much has changed from his time in Denver as a head coach? And yes, he spent a large majority of his career since then in New England as an offensive coordinator, and now he's back to a head coaching position in Las Vegas with the Raiders. So do we see a better, newer head coach in Josh McDaniels in terms of, being a people's person, or do we get more of the same? I mean, things have changed for some people, but sometimes it also stays the same. So for the Raiders, it could go a couple of ways for them. Depending on how things are with the offense, how things are with Derek Carr. At worst, they could do 8 wins, 8 and 9, or maybe they could go 10 wins. But this is a very competitive division. It'll all depend. This whole season will mostly depend on how Derek Carr does, how much he can advance that offense with such a talented group that's led by Davante Adams and Hunter Renfrow for the most part, and how that defense fares with a secondary that seems a little suspect still. So for the Las Vegas Raiders, they're rolling the dice this coming fall, and we might see which card they'll draw in Las Vegas.